Retreat Hell. What kind of fucking shit show is this? Michael stepped out of the Humvee before it had completely stopped. He ripped the silver oak leaf off his helmet before shoving it onto his head, annoyed that he had neglected to remove it earlier. He glanced at his watch. 09:22. Fuck, and we're already 8 hours into the day. The convoy behind his Humvee dispersed around what was supposed to be the Ganlin field headquarters. "It looks like we rolled into a fuck show, sir," his driver commented, heavy on the Bronx accent. "What it looks like is a 3-ring circus being looted by a stampeding herd of horned foxcat things," Michaels growled, slamming the door behind him. Recon reported the Ganlin were in trouble, but it didn't sound this bad, Sergeant Major Baracus said, walking up from his own Humvee with an unforgivably chipper spring in his step. "Something must have changed." "Let's go see what it is, then," Michael said, turning to march into the chaos of the disintegrating field command, a retinue of his immediate command staff, aides, and a fire team escort falling in behind him. "Isn't this supposed to be the bulk of the Ganlin army?" Major Winters asked. His new XO had only just relieved barely a week before. She struck him as competent, but he still hadn't had time to properly get to know her. At least, she just transferred from a front-line deployment, Michaels thought. This isn't the Middle East, but we'll need her combat experience. "The Ganlin Royal Host is most of their standing army, yes," Baracus answered, still too cheerfully. Michaels had noticed that the more things went to shit, the happier his sergeant major got. He swore he could almost see the 46-year-old Marine absorbing happiness from the panic and mayhem around him. "Wait, are they Ganlin or Keshmin?" First Lieutenant Sims asked. Sims was the HQ company's XO and acting as CO while Captain Niles was on convalescent leave. "The species is Keshmin," Baracus corrected. "Their nation is the Kingdom of Ganlin." "How are you able to keep all of this straight, Sergeant Major?" Winters asked. "Eidetic memory, ma'am." Winters gave him a sidelong glance before her attention was drawn by the scene ahead of them. Michael stopped as 2 Keshmin drug a chest across their path, their steel helmets askew and half their plate and chainmail missing. They screeched at him in a chirping language he didn't understand. "Tell me why we're here," Michael said, as he watched the 2 Keshmin struggle to haul the chest away. "Some kind of portal opened up less than 45 minutes from San Diego," Baracus answered. "Uh-huh. Fuzzy aliens with magic on the other side." "Yep. Losing a war with puritanical elves with even more magic." "Mm-hmm. Front line of the war and both armies are half a day's march from the portal." "Yeah. Oh, and the elves are bent on exterminating anything that isn't an elf, and sent the diplomatic party we sent to open communications with them back to us in very small pieces packed into very fancy boxes." "Right," Michael said, moving forward again. "Just needed a reminder. They couldn't make these guys any more of a comic book villain, could they?" Winters asked. "Probably not, ma'am." Further conversation was put on hold by their arrival at what appeared to be the main command pavilion. A 3-peaked pavilion, with 3 out of 4 sides rolled up for air. The red and blue canvas showed only minor soiling from field use. The inside, however, was in a state of utter disarray. Keshmin in fancy clothing and armor screeched at each other over tables strewn with maps, markers, a couple swords and knives, and a dozen or more items Michaels couldn't identify. As the Marines entered the pavilion, the Keshmin twitched and looked up, almost in unison, their ears swiveling to catch more sound, but not towards the humans. Over the chaos of the camp, Michaels heard the familiar thump and rumble of not-so-distant explosions. Chaos descended again, this time with a feverish pace, until one of the Keshmin with fancier armor barked over the din. Pointing about as he shouted orders, he managed to restore some semblance of order before turning to the humans as they approached. "You in charge here?" Michaels asked. The well-dressed Keshmin yipped a response. Catching himself mid-sentence with a growl, he turned and barked at a harried-looking assistant. After rummaging through an overturned chest, the young man rushed over with a softly glowing crystal thing, wrapped in thin bands of gold and silver. The assistant yipped a question, and the Ganlin commander impatiently waved a hand at him. With a wavering breath, the younger Keshmin steeled himself. Then his eyes lit up bright silver as he snapped the crystal in two. The crystal shattered into specks of energy, and a concussive pulse burst across the camp. Michaels felt something tingle in his head, and the young Keshmin promptly collapsed, flopping on his tail with a yipped, "Ooh!" "I am Lord General Kiwan Rern Yangri," the older Keshmin said. Michael snapped his gaze from the assistant, who seemed to be merely stunned, to the Lord General. He could understand him. Not as if the Keshmin were speaking English, but as if Michaels was fluent in whatever language he was speaking. High Commander of the Royal Host and Supreme Commander of Armies of the Kingdom of Ganlin. That mana crystal was worth 2 chests of gold, and could have powered a heavy artillery piece for a week. But I feel it is worth far more for both our forces to be able to understand each other. He held out his right hand in a familiar gesture, his left casually resting on the hilt of the sword on his hip. "Lieutenant Colonel Henry Michaels," Michaels replied, extending his own army to shake hands only to have the Lord General clasp his forearm instead. He quickly adapted. "2nd Battalion, 5th Marine Regiment, 1st Marine Division. What's the state of things here?" "Disaster," Yangri replied, gesturing towards the encroaching sounds of battle. "The bastard elves managed to force march nearly twice the forces into battle than we expected, and sent the heaviest concentration of their mages and gemblade regiments right down the middle. We did our best to hold, but what artillery we have left barely flickered their shields, and they decimated our pike formations before they even closed to melee." He sighed. "We're fighting a rearguard as we fall back, but the whole line is collapsing. The elves are pouring through, not half a mile away, and the royal host is in total rout. We have no choice but to retreat." Michaels took this all in, nodding as the Lord General spoke. It was a dire situation, and with the Ganlin army in shambles, nothing would stand between the portal and Earth. But he had also read the reports initial recon had made on the capabilities of both forces, limited as they were with barely more than 3 days since the portal first opened. He allowed himself an internal chuckle at the opportunity the universe had seen fit to give him. "Retreat?" he said. He forced his own expression to stay stone-cold neutral, but he felt the determination of the Marines behind him harden. "Hell, we just got here." He turned, leaving the Lord General looking nonplussed. "Sergeant Major, get those trucks unloaded. Anything that isn't combat gear gets dropped on the deck. Everything and everyone else who is issued a rifle heads to the front." "Aye, aye, sir." Baracus snapped to attention, then did an about-face, and marched out of the pavilion barking orders.